I have in my hand this book that was published in 2022 by British art historian Katy Hessel. The book's title is The Story of Art, Not Willie. If you take a look closer, it's very possible you won't be able to see, but it's titled The Story of Art Without Men. Now, is it an accident? Is it a misprint that maybe they didn't write without men in a way that is easy for us to see? Not really. Turns out that's not an accident at all. Katy Hessel and the editors of this book decided to design that title purposefully like that so that we raise a bigger question. What has been the role of women in art? What has been the role of women specifically in the history of art? After reading that book, I felt inspired at trying to come up with a reflection about the importance of history, the importance of history making, the importance of history writing, and the labor behind art historical thinking. So why history matters? And why does it matter so much specifically in our current times? This and other questions will be entertained in this new episode of Hieroglyphs. Ah, that's good coffee. During a conversation in 2024, Katy Hessel declared, "I came into an art fair, I looked around me, and I realized that I could not see a single artwork made by a woman artist. It was a moment that changed my life forever." As she continues describing the origins of her project, she went on to openly accept that the problem didn't end there. The biggest problem, perhaps, is that she could not name at least 20 women artists that she knew of. Now, was this Katy Hessel's fault? Should we blame her for not knowing the name of more women artists? It seems that Katy Hessel, as any art history student, has learned a view of the past that is selective, biased, and exclusive. Katy's acceptance happens not because these women artists never existed. Instead, what this shows is that their presence, apparently their existence, was not good enough to be part of art history books. Now, with this, I am not suggesting that this is history's fault. Instead, I am trying to set a reminder on history's important role, not as an absolute product to give definite facts, but as an ongoing process in which we can learn about that past, and along the way, we can also confront it and continuously revisit the instruments and the strategies used to bring that past to us. What this is also suggesting is an incompatibility between history, memory, and past. At this point, to get started, we have to understand that history and past are not the same. They deal relatively with the same type of concerns, but one cannot exist without the other. History depends on the past, but the past itself is everything that has already happened that is inaccessible to us. Now, how do we access that past? If the past is everything that happened that we can't access, then how is it that we remember our childhood? How is it that we can talk about something that we experienced but is no longer taking place? We can recur to memory, and that will probably be the most straightforward way to go. But as you can imagine, memory is malleable. Memory is fragmentary. Memory is hard to retain for a long span of time. I will give you an example. Imagine that I ask you to write down your autobiography. I give you a pencil, I give you a piece of paper, and I ask you to sit down and write everything that you have lived up until this point. No matter if you are 10, if you are 20, if you are 3 years old, you're going to run possibly with two issues. The first is that it will be very unlikely for you to remember everything that you have ever experienced in your life. Every single detail from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, to the people that you have met, the places that you have been to. The second problem is that with the space and the time given, you will have to select what is it that you are going to be talking about. And with that process of selection comes an aspect of determining under your judgment what you consider was important to remember and to preserve for posterity. What I'm describing here, the act of sitting down and writing down your memories, is where history takes place. So, history is a process about the past. And I say that it's a process, but not a final product, because history is continually reviewing aspects about the past. The reviewing of those aspects about the past is precisely the endeavor that Katy Hessel took and decided to engage with once she conceived the idea for the story of art without men. It's one of those examples where a historian realizes the uses and the abuses of history as a means of compiling, as a means of accumulating memory. Katy Hessel realizes that there were indeed many women throughout the times that had enormous contributions to the practice of art, more specifically to the practice of painting. But she realizes in the process that for some reason these women were not included in written records. Now, if you are not included in written records, it sort of suggests that you did not exist, that your legacy, your presence on this planet will not be remembered in years to come. We could also make an interesting claim following up on the ideas of historian Keith Jenkins. Based on the accounts, as we have described by Katy Hessel's publication, it seems that historians have sufficient tools today, documents, artifacts, data, etc., to make a more comprehensive sense of the past as the same people who lived and experienced it. So it's possible that we know and have gathered more information about the way ancient societies lived than those same ancient societies themselves. Only we make sense of our current present as we look at it from a distance, as time goes by. Think about it. Imagine that you are facing a challenging situation in your life. Do you happen to remember or make sense of it as you are trying to face and solve the situation? It's possible that after many years, you will have more perspective and more tools to understand what took place at that specific point in your life where you believed that there was no way back. It's very hard, almost impossible, to judge our present time as we are experiencing, as we are living it. Only with the distance required after a certain amount of time can we look back and make a claim or judge our actions or the actions of others as they took place. Similarly, Fred Wilson's Mining the Museum from 1992 used history as an opportunity to revisit and question the ways the American past has been told and learned through history books, collections, and politics of display at an institutional level. In this specific case, at the Maryland Historical Society, which is where Fred Wilson installed this groundbreaking project. Howard Hall described Wilson's process as an excavation, and I like that way of defining it because that's precisely what Wilson does. He digs into the profundities of American history to unveil, to revisit hidden realities, and to confront the denial of identity for Black Americans. And when I say confront, I am thinking of him confronting the institution that had all those subjects in their collection, the institution for the ways in which those subjects had been traditionally displayed, and particularly also confronting viewers implicitly by the way in which he's using those same objects and is rearranging them to grant them a different meaning, an unaccounted perspective. But the name mining the museum also adopts semantically another dimension, as Wilson is symbolically inserting himself as a Trojan horse into the hierarchical and exclusionary conventions of curatorial work at an institutional level. So we're looking at mining here under the scope of extracting, but we're also thinking of mining as an act of appropriation. Mining as in, this is mine, this belongs to me too, this is my cultural memory. Wilson, as in the labor of a historian, selects, arranges, organizes a view of the past unaccounted for, a view of the past not through fiction or made up opinions, but through artifacts, actual material residues from yesterday that function as evidence of a history never told, or, as Katy Hessel will say, of a story, a tale that was rather denied from the accounts of American history. What he did was going through the collection of the Maryland Historical Museum, and he was surprised to discover the lack of objectivity in the display. He reorganized many of those objects from the collection, which used to be on display under a partialized take on the past, and he tried to reconsider the way the society in Maryland looked at those objects. He intended to question the practices and the politics of seeing. For instance, through that process, he realized how there were no portraits of important historical figures in Maryland of African American descent. Instead, he noticed how there were busts and works about people who never ever lived in Maryland, such as Napoleon Bonaparte, Henry Clay, amongst others, but who reminded citizens of their so-called white roots, disregarding the origins and the important contributions of other figures who at some point did live in Maryland, such as Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and Benjamin Banneker. In other sections of the installation, he installed shackles next to tea utensils, such as pots, cups, and saucers, or Victorian chairs standing next to whipping posts used for the physical punishment of oppressed African Americans, as a subtle yet powerful reminder in which Wilson leaves traces, visual clues to comment on the framing of human suffering as a form of a spectacle and entertainment for the upper classes. Fred Wilson, as an artist and somehow also taking the role of a curator or a historian himself, brings to the table the issue of display in the museum space. How culture and history are displayed in a museum. How museums address issues of race, of class, of gender, of colonization, and of imperialism. And it is precisely the role of artists, but mainly the role of history, of historians, to point that out. Let this be an opportunity to bring up the name of Kehinde Wiley, yet another influential and very important artist who decided to unearth, to explore his roots, his denied identity, who decided to claim his place by taking a pawn at the traditional politics of pictorial representation. It's so important to remember this bold gesture of Kehinde Wiley, who in 2005 portrayed American rapper Ice-T sitting on the same throne, as a direct reference to Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres' depiction of French Emperor Napoleon. Kehinde Wiley's painting adopts elements from the original Ingres, such as the pose while seated, the angle, the rounded back throne, the armrest, the red royal robes, plus the elements he holds that reinforce this idea of power, such as the staff and the scepter, among others. Wiley's is a gesture of defiance, but mostly of dignification and reclamation. In some interviews, Wiley acknowledges his disappointment in art school when he couldn't find any artwork created by or featuring a black person unless it was portrayed as a submissive servant figure. He mentioned how he will spend a lot of time, I am quoting him here, at museums and staring at white flesh only. That experience made him frame his role as an artist by revisiting the hierarchical narratives perpetuated and normalized throughout the history of art. Ice-T does not look authoritarian at all, neither in his gesture nor in the clothes that he wears. He seems like one regular civilian without any intention of conveying or demonstrating power and authority. His identity claim is more iconographic rather than explicitly violent. Is defiant, but not to the degree of being intimidating. As I said before, is more dignifying rather than anything else. In the original painting, Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres portrays Napoleon not simply as a political leader or a ruthless emperor. More than that, Napoleon appears as an almighty divinity for the way he sits and the garments that he's wearing. He sits as a Christ-like figure, which coincidentally is reminiscent of early medieval and Christian Orthodox depictions of Christ as the Pantocrator. The Pantocrator, the term means simply the Almighty, sitting on a round-backed and gilded throne with an ornamented armrest composed by carved imperial eagles, by spheres that seem to be made from ivory. If we look through this sort of chronology of uses of the figure of a political leader seated on a throne, we can look at how Kehinde Wiley is using history to comment on Ingres's painting, but Ingres also pays some depth to the tradition of Christian Orthodox icons that also depicted Christ in a way to show him as the Almighty, in a way adapting or paying their debts to other traditions that also had the symbol of someone sitting on a throne to tell a story. This is why we need history, because it's the only possible way to make sense of, to understand, to contrast, to review where we come from. We can disagree with it. We could even find it confronting, but only can we live and make sense of our current present and therefore of our identity by acknowledging that past and the peoples that came before us matter. We can look back at our actions and the actions of those who preceded us, and we can either accept and carry on with those traditions, but we have the opportunity to review and to confront them, to move forward as a community, and most importantly, to make an impact in our present time. So now, before we go, tell me, what legacy would you like to leave for future generations? How would you like to be remembered?